Welcome back to the channel. This video is looking at tropospheric ozone, or known as ground level ozone, which is part of the atmospheric science and environmental science playlist, looking at pollutants in our atmosphere, how they get there, and in reference to ozone, the two different types of ozone, both the tropospheric and the stratospheric. This is the Earth Science Classroom. Firstly, what is ozone? Ozone is a word given to a molecule of 3 oxygen atoms that are chemically bonded through covalent bonds. Now, this molecule is a little different because it's a hybrid. It contains both single and double bonds, so we call it 1.5, and this also is at a 116-degree angle between the 3 oxygen atoms, and this ozone molecule is special. It exists in mostly the stratosphere, but also in the troposphere, which is the focus of our video today. But this molecule is responsible for a great deal of chemical reactions in our atmosphere and also protection of our atmosphere. It is naturally occurring and exists through natural outgassings from our planet's surface, like volcanoes and ocean exchange. And the focus of our video is the formation of excess ozone in the troposphere. And we'll get onto that very shortly. When discussing ozone, we've got to discuss both the troposphere and the stratosphere as the main 2 layers of our atmosphere where this oxygen molecule exists naturally and also through excess formation with anthropogenic activities. So the troposphere is the lowest layer from the surface up to around 12 to 25 kilometers in altitude, and then starts the stratosphere that goes from around 10 to 12, 15 kilometers up to around 50 kilometers in altitude, and you'll see the temperature actually increases as you increase up through the stratosphere, whereas the troposphere, there is an environmental lapse rate that is negative, which means it gets colder as you go higher up into the troposphere. And 99% of the atmospheric mass, or the air molecules, are within the troposphere and stratosphere due to gravity, and as shown in the diagram, the ozone layer is also located within the stratosphere, but the focus of this video will be lower down in the troposphere. Tropospheric ozone formation. When discussing tropospheric ozone, we have to also discuss the stratosphere because the majority of the atmosphere's ozone is located and formed in the stratosphere. So around 90%, and about 10% will be in the troposphere. Now, the stratosphere is that second layer that extends from around 15 kilometers above the surface of the Earth up to around 50. Now, the ozone layer is a term given to a concentration of ozone, O3, situated or located in the stratosphere, and it has a very important function to absorb and block and protect our planet from dangerous, powerful radiation that the sun produces and sends our way as part of sunlight. Now, this is called ultraviolet radiation or short wave radiation. Now, short wave refers to the shortened size of the wavelength, denoting a more powerful energy wave compared to, let's say, infrared or microwave or radio waves, which are stretched out and longer wavelengths and not as powerful. So the stratosphere receives this sunlight, which includes mostly ultraviolet and visible light, infrared, as this spectrum of energy from the sun. And the ozone layer, the concentration of 3 oxygens chemically bonded with covalent bonds, the hybrid 1.5 bond, is going to absorb pretty much all of the ultraviolet C, which is the smallest wavelength, the most powerful type of ultraviolet radiation, and this is absorbed by the ozone molecule, which is amazing because that is going to basically provide a barrier between this harmful radiation, which would literally destroy our planet's surface, and the life below it, the ecosystems below it, us that live on the Earth. And UVB, which is the next type of ultraviolet radiation, which goes from about 280 to about 315 nanometers in wavelength. This is absorbed, and about 10% or up to around 10% of that UVB is allowed through the ozone layer and through into the troposphere. And then we have the most gentle, the longer wavelength ultraviolet light, which is just before you reach the visible light and the violet or blue color in the visible light. About 95% of this nice UVA radiation is allowed through the stratosphere and through the ozone layer to interact with both the troposphere and the Earth's surface, both the oceans and the land. Now, this UVA is productive for our planet, for ecology, and for life to flourish, compared to UVC, which would literally kill it. Now, the ozone layer in the stratosphere is formed just from that powerful radiation, the HV, the sunlight, the ultraviolet radiation, breaking apart oxygen in the atmosphere, which constitutes 20.8% in the whole atmosphere. So the pre-existing oxygen, O2, plus the sunlight is going to split it apart and break the bonds and make two atomic oxygens. They're going to fly around and then re-chemically bond with oxygen O2 to make O3. So the O3 in the stratosphere is termed good because it's protecting and covering our planet with a shield that's going to block this harmful ultraviolet radiation. Now, there is some mixing between that stratospheric ozone and the troposphere. Around 10% of the troposphere's ozone is through mixing from the above stratosphere. Now, the radiation that does pass through the stratosphere and the ozone layer is responsible for forming the tropospheric ozone or ground level ozone. Now, there is a small amount in the atmosphere whereby ground level ozone is naturally occurring. You do get natural amounts of air molecules and compounds that are going to break apart, like CO2, SO2. They'll break apart with the addition of sunlight and separate that oxygen into an atomic oxygen. Once you have the atomic oxygen, it can form and chemically bond with the pre-existing O2 in the atmosphere and form O3. So there is a small amount of natural tropospheric ozone, but in this video we're discussing it as an air pollutant because it has larger concentrations and has become harmful or hazardous to the ecosystems and to life because of the higher concentrations, and that is due to the formation of tropospheric ozone from the breakdown of NO2 or nitrogen dioxide. When you add sunlight into this gas, into this air molecule, NO2, it's going to break apart into nitric oxide plus the atomic oxygen. As said before, the atomic oxygen is highly chemically reactive, high energy. It's going to fly around and bond with an O2, making O3. So tropospheric ozone mostly comes from the breakdown of NO2 with sunlight, but also can form with the breakdown of other air molecules and compounds such as CO2 or SO2 or carbon monoxide. Now, all of these contain an oxygen which, when broken down, will then form O3 tropospheric ozone. Now, once this forms, it can absorb infrared and very minimal visible light radiation, which is between 400 nanometers to about 775 nanometers. But the infrared, which is above 775 nanometers in wavelength, the infrared is absorbed by this ozone molecule and does act as a greenhouse gas, whereby it's going to absorb and then re-emit from that molecule, and that will cause the molecule to vibrate and move and emit more heat back into the atmosphere. So it's not the most powerful greenhouse gas compared to, let's say, water vapor or CO2, but it does play a major role in the temperature of the troposphere and the atmosphere by the surface of the Earth. Now, these concentrations of ozone do fluctuate based with time of day. Obviously, it needs sunlight to produce the chemical reactions. So during nighttime, the ground level ozone levels will decrease and go to a minimum in that area. But during the day, during times of peak car exhaust, industrial action, or processes where you have the increased amount of NO2 or SO2 or CO2 and the addition of VOCs being emitted into the atmosphere to chemically react with the sunlight, you're going to get times of higher production of tropospheric ozone, and it's going to fluctuate during the day. Now, the reason why ultraviolet radiation in the troposphere is not able to dissociate the oxygen molecule O2 into the separate atomic oxygens is it's not powerful enough to break down. So any wavelength higher, which means larger than 290 nanometers, is not able to break down the oxygen molecule when it's in the troposphere. However, in the stratosphere, there's a lot stronger ultraviolet radiation able to break down. So the main difference between the troposphere and stratosphere is the way that the ozone is formed due to the availability of ultraviolet radiation and the presence of other gases like NO2, which are easier to break down through sunlight to produce that atomic oxygen. Tropospheric ozone regulations and concentrations. Ground level ozone, or tropospheric ozone, was originally discussed by Schmidt in 1952 in regards to the LA smog, which had inundated the area and became a topic of national interest and scientific investigation and research. Now, research suggests that ground level ozone has increased in the troposphere between 25 to 50%. This is down to industrial revolution, industrialization, the growth of urbanization and cities, and also the burn-in and use and production of precursor gases such as nitrogen dioxide, CO2, VOCs, carbon monoxide, and sulfur dioxide in order to produce the tropospheric ozone through dissociation and photolysis. And studies also suggest that with every passing decade, tropospheric ozone will increase by between 2 up to 12% of the current measurements in the atmosphere. So the World Health Organization designates different levels for different air molecules and air pollutants. And for ozone, it designates a maximum threshold which is deemed healthy, or the limit of healthy concentration of ozone, which would be around 50 parts per billion, or ppb. Now the US allow up to 70 ppb according to the 2015 NAAQS, which is the National Standards of Air Quality from 2015, and this has not been updated. Now it's 10 years old, but the ground level ozone is definitely an air pollutant which is monitored, measured by most states and obviously by the EPA, which is a federal agency. And this AQI is a daily measurement and indication of the air quality in your area. And this scale can go up to 500, whereby anything above 101, you would have people who are sensitive to these air pollutants to have unhealthy side effects and issues with their health. Anything above an AQI of 151 would be generally unhealthy for all people. Anything above 201 to 300 would be very unhealthy and very hazardous. And then we get anything above 300 plus up to 500 would be just the worst situation ever, where all these health issues become a real problem across all ages and all genders and all areas. And that can be the issue for ground level ozone, because it is a non-uniform air pollutant, a secondary air pollutant, which combines through photochemical reactions in the atmosphere, and it varies with the time of day, with the season, with latitude, and with location. And the atmospheric conditions can either help or hinder this air molecule and the potential for pollution in the atmosphere. The effect of tropospheric ozone on both the ecosystem and humans. Tropospheric ozone, or ground level ozone, is no different to other air pollutants present in our troposphere and around our urbanized areas, and it can affect both any humans in the area and also the ecosystem. So any plants can be susceptible to increased O3 at the ground level or troposphere, and this can cause the plants damage in their stomata cells, which is responsible for the gas exchange within the leaves and the cellular respiration and water transportation, and also the ability for the plant to fight off any pathogens or disease through these cells. So they get damaged, the plant is basically less resilient. So there's a reduction in photosynthesis, which obviously is very critical in the plant's functionality, and it damages crop yields and forests. Now, in terms of humans, both acute and chronic, they're looking at, again, eye, throat, nose irritation with coughing and increased asthma symptoms. In more serious chronic conditions and situations with humans, you can contract lung diseases from increased ozone levels, heart issues, and in the worst case, premature death. And in addition to pure tropospheric ozone formed from the breakdown of nitrogen dioxide and the addition of more oxygen, you're looking at the chemical mixing with both VOCs and other primary pollutants to create photochemical smog, which is a hazardous air pollutant in itself, and the addition of particulate matter, all of which are very dangerous air pollutants. Summarizing tropospheric ozone or ground level ozone. The main takeaway for tropospheric ozone is the way it forms and the effect on the atmosphere, on the troposphere, once it is formed in high concentrations. Now, the stratospheric ozone, the good ozone, is protection from the ultraviolet light. The tropospheric ozone is bad and a greenhouse gas. Now, what's the difference? First, its formation. Tropospheric ozone is formed through the breakdown or dissociation of nitrogen dioxide mostly, plus oxygen to form O3. So the oxygen in NO2 is taken away, and that is added to the pre-existing oxygen in the atmosphere, O2, to make O3, and that's going to absorb infrared radiation and emit heat into the atmosphere, thus being a greenhouse gas, and in large concentrations can heat the atmosphere more than the normal or natural levels, thus heating the atmosphere and greenhouse effect occurs. The other takeaway is that this is a naturally occurring air molecule. O3 is naturally occurring through natural photochemical reactions in the atmosphere. The difference is through the additional release of anthropogenic sources, gases such as nitrogen dioxide, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and VOCs are breaking down through sunlight into increased amount of atomic oxygen, therefore increased amounts of tropospheric or ground level ozone, which will then accumulate and become an air pollutant over a certain value according to AQI, around 101 or 151, based on the groups of people exposed to this and also the effect on the environment. So the release of these gases, these precursors that will help to form tropospheric ozone or ground level ozone through sunlight, is very important to understand, and the difference in the formation between stratospheric and tropospheric is very important to understand. This is the Earth Science Classroom. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, please subscribe, like, and share. And if you want more content and videos on Earth Science, please check out my channel.